My foster family of 11 years is kicking me out by the end of the week. I have nowhere to go and I feel broken. I jolted awake, the sharp ring of my phone piercing through the early morning stillness. My heart raced as I glanced at the screen, seeing a name that made my blood run cold, Claire. I froze, torn between answering the call and letting it ring out. Every second felt like an eternity as memories of the past few days flashed through my mind. How could she be calling me now, after everything that had happened? After everything they had done? My finger hovered over the decline button, and with a trembling hand, I let the phone go silent. My name is Jack, and I'm 18 years old. For the past 11 years, I've been living with the Peters family, a couple who took me in when I was just a terrified 7-year-old boy. My biological parents were unfit to care for me, and so I was placed into the foster system, a confusing and frightening experience for a child who had never known anything but chaos and instability. When I first arrived at the Peters home, I didn't know what to expect. I was a scared little boy who had learned early on that love was conditional, something that could be given and taken away without warning or explanation. But the Peters seemed different, at least, that's what I thought. They were kind, patient, and over time, I began to feel safe with them. They became my new family, and I started calling them Mom and Dad not long after I moved in. Their son Jamie, who was older than me, became my brother. For years, I was convinced that I had finally found a family that would love me unconditionally, a place where I could belong and be accepted for who I was. The years passed, and I grew up with them, celebrating birthdays, holidays, and all the little moments that make up a life. They helped me with my homework, cheered me on at school events, and comforted me when the weight of my past became too much to bear. I was one of them, at least, I believed I was. They told me that the legalities didn't matter, that I was as much their son as Jamie was, even if I wasn't adopted. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. As the weeks turned into months, I began to settle into my new life. The flat was small, but it was mine, a place where I could close the door on the past and focus on building a future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my A-levels and secure my place at university. It wasn't easy, juggling coursework with a part-time job left me exhausted most days, but the hard work gave me a sense of purpose. I was no longer drifting, I had a goal, something to work towards. My evenings were quiet, often spent alone with my thoughts. The isolation was tough at first. After years of living in a bustling household, the silence of my new flat was unsettling. I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, and feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. But gradually, I started to embrace the solitude. It gave me time to think, to reflect on everything that had happened, and to figure out who I was outside of the Peters family. One day, as I was unpacking the last of the boxes I had brought with me, I stumbled across an old photo album. It was one Claire had put together when I first came to live with them. The photos were a mix of snapshots from those early days, my first Christmas with them, a family trip to the seaside, me and Jamie playing in the snow. I hadn't looked at the album in years, but now, flipping through the pages, I was struck by how happy we all looked. The smiles, the laughter, it all seemed so genuine. But those pictures felt like they belonged to someone else's life, not mine. The boy in those photos was a different person, one who hadn't yet learned how fragile the love he'd found could be. I closed the album and set it aside, deciding to put it away, along with the other remnants of my time with the Peters. It was time to move on. University started in the autumn, and it was like stepping into a new world. The campus was vast, bustling with students from all walks of life, each of them caught up in their own stories. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could be anyone I wanted to be. No one knew my past. No one knew I had been a foster kid, shuffled from one home to another before landing with the Peters. Here, I was just Jack, another student trying to find his way. I threw myself into my studies, focusing on my passion for classics. The ancient world had always fascinated me, the stories of gods and heroes, the rise and fall of empires. There was something comforting about immersing myself in those distant times, where the problems of the present seemed to fade away. My professors were engaging, and the coursework challenging, but I thrived on it. It felt good to be doing something for myself, something that wasn't about survival or making ends meet. I made a few friends along the way, fellow students who shared my interests. We'd spend hours in the library, poring over ancient texts, or debating historical theories over coffee. It was different from the friendships I'd had before, less intense, more about shared interests than emotional bonds, but it was nice. I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. But despite the new life I was building, the past still lingered, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I thought about Claire and Matt more often than I wanted to admit. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself scrolling through old messages or rereading the letter I had sent them before I left. Jamie reached out occasionally, checking in to see how I was doing, but I kept my responses brief. I wasn't ready to open that door again, not yet. One evening, as I was leaving the university library, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Jamie. "Hey, Jack. I know things have been tough, and I don't want to push, but I miss you, man. We all do. Can we meet up? Just to talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. I wanted to see him, to hear his voice and feel that connection again. But I was also afraid that seeing him would bring back all the hurt, all the pain I'd worked so hard to move past. In the end, I replied with a simple, "Okay." When and where? We arranged to meet at a small cafe near the university. It was the same place we had met months before, when Jamie had first reached out after everything went down. As I walked to the cafe, my heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew that whatever happened, I needed to face it head on. Jamie was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window. He looked up as I walked in, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, a tentative, hopeful smile, and I felt something in my chest loosen, just a little. "Hey," he said as I sat down. "Thanks for meeting me." "Yeah," I replied, my voice sounding more strained than I intended. "It's good to see you." We ordered drinks, and for a while, we just sat there, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Jamie broke the silence. "I know I said this before, but I really am sorry, Jack. For everything. I didn't handle things the way I should have, and I know that. I miss having you around." I looked at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Jamie had always been the easygoing one, the brother who could make anyone laugh, who never seemed to take anything too seriously. But now, there was a seriousness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "I miss you too," I admitted, surprising myself with how true the words felt. "But things are different now, Jamie. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were." Jamie nodded, his expression somber. "I get that. I really do. But I'm hoping we can find a new normal, you know? Maybe not the same as before, but something." I didn't respond right away, taking a sip of my coffee as I thought about what he was saying. Could we find a new normal? Could I let go of the anger and hurt enough to rebuild some kind of relationship with him? "I'm not sure how to do that," I finally said. "It's going to take time, Jamie. A lot of time." He nodded again. "I know. And I'm willing to wait. I just want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." We talked for a while longer, catching up on the little things, his job, my studies, the mundane details of our lives. It was awkward at first, but as the conversation flowed, I started to feel a little more at ease. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, even if it wasn't the way things had been before. When we finally said our goodbyes, Jamie pulled me into a hug. It was brief, but it felt like a small step towards healing. "Take care of yourself, Jack," he said as we parted ways. "And don't be a stranger, okay?" I nodded, watching him walk away before turning back towards my flat. The night air was cool, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and there were still a lot of unresolved feelings, but it was a start. As I walked home, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, I had faced it all, and I was still standing. I had built a life for myself, one that was mine and mine alone. And now, I was ready to start opening up to the people who still cared about me, even if it took time. I reached my flat and unlocked the door, stepping into the warmth and familiarity of my own space. I looked around at the small but cozy living room, the bookshelves filled with my favorite texts, the soft light from the lamp casting a warm glow. This was my home now, a place I had created for myself. As I sat down on the couch, I picked up my phone and typed out a quick message to Jamie. "Thanks for today. Let's keep in touch." I hit send and set the phone down, leaning back against the cushions with a deep breath. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face it, whatever it might bring. And with that thought, I let myself relax, knowing that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived the worst, and now, it was time to start living again. But then, just a few days ago, everything changed. The Peters sat me down and told me that I needed to move out. Just like that, they were asking me to leave the only home I'd ever known. The words they used felt like daggers in my heart. "It's not personal, Jack. It's just business." Business. As if the 11 years I had spent with them could be reduced to a financial transaction. I wasn't their son anymore, I was just another expense they could no longer afford. I had always known they were paid to foster me, £400 a month, to be exact. But it never bothered me before. I told myself it was just the way things were, and it didn't change the love they showed me. But when the payments stopped on my 18th birthday, the love seemed to stop too. They applied for a staying put arrangement so they could continue receiving some money while I was still living with them, but it wasn't enough. They needed more. They needed the full amount they would get for taking in a new foster child. And so, they decided to replace me. They gave me 4 days to pack my things and find somewhere else to live. 4 days to leave the only family I had ever known. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. It was as if they had torn away the veil that had been hiding the truth all these years. I was never really part of their family. I was just a foster kid, a temporary guest whose welcome had finally worn out. That first night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling as tears silently streamed down my face. The world I had known for the past 11 years was crumbling around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Every shadow in my room seemed to take on a menacing shape, reminding me that I was no longer safe, no longer wanted. I barely slept, and when I did, it was fitful and restless. My dreams were filled with the faces of the people I had called my family, now cold and distant, their eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Guilt? Or was it simply indifference? The next day, feeling like a ghost drifting through the motions of life, I called my personal advisor, the one person I thought might be able to help me. We arranged an emergency meeting, and I found myself sitting in a small, dimly lit office, pouring out the story of my sudden abandonment. My PA listened patiently, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. It was clear that he had seen situations like mine before, but that didn't make it any easier for him, or for me. He assured me that what the Peters were doing wasn't right, that they couldn't legally kick me out with just 4 days' notice. He promised to speak with them and try to find a solution. In the meantime, he put me on the list for social housing and found a hostel where I could stay temporarily. It wasn't much, but it was better than being homeless. The idea of living in a hostel filled me with dread, but I knew I had no other choice. When I returned to the Peters house, the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if I had become invisible to them. They barely acknowledged me, and when they did, it was with cold, detached expressions. I tried to keep to myself, staying in my room as much as possible, but the weight of their rejection was crushing me. I couldn't understand how people who had once shown me so much love could now act as if I didn't exist. Even meals became a source of anxiety. Before, dinner was a time when we all gathered together, sharing stories of our day and laughing over inside jokes. But now, I couldn't bring myself to join them at the table. I stayed in my room, listening to the clinking of cutlery and muffled conversations from downstairs, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Eventually, Claire started bringing my meals up to my room, leaving them outside my door with a soft knock. It was a small gesture, but it only made me feel worse. It was like a reminder that I was no longer part of the family, just a burden they were obligated to care for until I was gone. I felt utterly alone. Even my best friend, who I thought would support me no matter what, turned against me. He accused me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating everything the Peters had done for me. We had a huge argument, and now he wasn't speaking to me either. I had no one left. No one to turn to. The people I had trusted most in the world had abandoned me, and the one person I thought I could count on was gone too. The days dragged on, each one more unbearable than the last. My PA managed to convince the Peters to let me stay until the end of August, but it didn't feel like a victory. The damage had already been done. The love and warmth that had once filled this house were gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I couldn't stay here any longer, but I had nowhere else to go. I started spending more and more time in my room, avoiding the people who had once been my family. The walls of my room felt like a prison, but they were the only place I felt even remotely safe. Then, yesterday, Jamie came to my room. He had found the Reddit post I had written in a moment of desperation, pouring out all the pain and betrayal I felt. I hadn't meant for anyone in the family to see it, but somehow, Jamie did. He confronted me, asking why I hadn't told him about any of this. I thought he knew. I thought he was part of it, but he wasn't. He was just as shocked as I was. Against my wishes, he shared the post with our parents. "Mom, Dad, you need to read this," he wrote in the family group chat. "You need to see what you're doing to him." I knew he was trying to help, but it only made things worse. They read the message, but they didn't respond. Not a word. The silence was deafening. I couldn't bear it any longer. I packed my things and left the house, feeling like a ghost of the person I used to be. My PA had arranged for me to stay at the hostel, and that's where I went. It was a small, bare room, with a single bed and a window that looked out onto a gray, dreary street. It was a far cry from the home I had known for the past 11 years, but at least it was mine. I sent a final message to Claire and Matt, the people I had once called Mum and Dad. I poured my heart into that message, telling them how much they had meant to me, how much they had hurt me, and how much I wished things could have been different. I told them I didn't want to lose them, but I couldn't stay in a place where I wasn't wanted. And then, I left the family group chat. I posted the message on Facebook, not caring who saw it or what they thought. I needed to be heard. I needed them to know what they had done to me. Later that night, Claire called me. Her voice was shaking as she apologized, saying she had no idea I felt this way. She begged me to come back, telling me she loved me and that she regretted everything. But it was too late. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the damage that had been done. I hung up, blocking her number, and sat in the dark, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever find another family, or if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. But I do know one thing: I can't stay in the past. I have to move forward, even if it means leaving everything behind. The first night at the hostel was a strange experience. The room was small and bare, with a single bed pushed against the wall and a window that overlooked a gray, dreary street. The mattress was lumpy, and the sheets smelled faintly of bleach. It wasn't home, but it was a place to sleep. I unpacked my few belongings, placing them carefully around the room to make it feel less empty. But no matter how much I tried, it still felt like a place where I didn't belong. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the Peters. How had it all gone so wrong? How had the people who had once made me feel so loved and safe become the source of my deepest pain? I replayed the past few days over and over in my mind, searching for answers that never came. I wanted to understand, but all I felt was confusion and hurt. I had thought I would cry that night, but the tears never came. I felt numb, as if all the emotions had been drained out of me, leaving behind an empty shell. The only sound in the room was the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick marking the passing of time that seemed to drag on forever. I wished for sleep, but it eluded me, leaving me alone with my thoughts. In the days that followed, I tried to adjust to my new life at the hostel. It wasn't easy. The other residents were a mix of care leavers like me and people who had fallen on hard times. We all had our own stories, our own struggles, but there was an unspoken understanding among us, a shared experience of loss and displacement. I kept to myself, not wanting to get too close to anyone. Trust was something I couldn't afford to give easily anymore. My PA visited me regularly, checking in to make sure I was okay and helping me navigate the process of applying for social housing. He was kind and supportive, and I appreciated his efforts, but there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel like I was just another case to him, another file on his desk. I didn't blame him for that, it was his job, after all, but it made me feel even more disconnected from the world around me. The hostel wasn't home, but it was a place where I could start to rebuild my life. I applied for a few part-time jobs, hoping to save up enough money to eventually move into my own place. I still had my university offer, and I was determined to make it through, to prove to myself and to the world that I could do this on my own. But the future felt uncertain, and the weight of everything that had happened was always there, pressing down on me like a heavy burden. One day, as I was sitting in the small common area of the hostel, scrolling through my phone, I received a message from Jamie. I hadn't heard from him since I left the Peters house, and seeing his name on my screen filled me with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. I hesitated before opening the message, unsure of what to expect. "Hey, Jack," the message read. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I'm so sorry for how things went down. I had no idea they were going to do that to you. I feel like I failed you as a brother. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut all ties and move on with my life. But another part of me, a part that still longed for the family I had lost, wanted to hear him out. I typed out a reply, my fingers trembling as I pressed send. "Sure," I wrote. "Let's talk." We agreed to meet at a small cafe not far from the hostel. When I arrived, I saw Jamie sitting at a table by the window, staring down at his phone. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, we just stood there, unsure of what to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have known what was going on. I should have been there for you." I didn't know how to respond. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many emotions I wanted to express, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Jamie continued, "I've been thinking about everything, and I realize now that I didn't do enough. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you need." I looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity. He seemed genuine, but the wounds were still too fresh, too raw. I appreciated his words, but I wasn't sure if I could trust him, or anyone, in the same way again. "I don't know, Jamie," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever go back to how things were." He nodded, his expression somber. "I understand. Just know that I'm here if you ever want to talk, if you ever need anything." We sat in silence for a while after that, sipping our drinks and staring out the window. The conversation had opened a door, but it hadn't healed the rift that had formed between us. I wasn't sure if it ever would. As I walked back to the hostel that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that had settled in my chest. The future was a blank canvas, and I had no idea what to paint on it. The family I had once known was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life on my own. The days turned into weeks, and I slowly began to find a new rhythm. I got a part-time job at a local grocery store, stacking shelves and manning the checkout. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I saved every penny I could, determined to build a future for myself, even if I wasn't sure what that future would look like. Every now and then, I would receive a text from Jamie, checking in to see how I was doing. We didn't talk about the past, but there was an unspoken understanding that things would never be the same between us. I appreciated his efforts, but I knew that some wounds would take a long time to heal, if they ever did. The hostel became my temporary home, a place where I could begin to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. But I kept going, one day at a time, determined to prove to myself that I could survive this, that I could come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as I sat on the small bed in my hostel room, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings with the Peters. In each photo, we looked so happy, so close. It was hard to reconcile those images with the reality of what had happened. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of resolve. The past was the past, and I couldn't change it. All I could do was move forward. I closed the photo album and opened my notes app. I had been thinking a lot about what I wanted to do with my life, and I had finally decided to start making a plan. I typed out a list of goals: finish my A-levels, start university, find a more stable job, save up for my own place. It was a small list, but it was something to work towards, something to give me direction. As I stared at the list, I felt a small flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be challenges, but I was determined to keep moving forward. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The next day, I received a call from my PA. He had some good news: a social housing flat had become available, and I was at the top of the list. I could hardly believe it. After weeks of uncertainty and anxiety, I finally had a place to call my own. The flat wasn't large or luxurious, but it was mine, a place where I could start fresh, where I could build a new life for myself. Moving into the flat was a whirlwind of emotions. As I unpacked my belongings, arranging them in the small space, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was a new beginning, but it was also a step into the unknown. I knew I would face challenges, but I also knew that I had the strength to overcome them. I took a deep breath and looked around the flat. It was small, but it was enough. It was a place where I could start to heal, where I could begin to build a future for myself. I wasn't sure what that future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. As I settled into my new home, I began to focus on my studies, preparing for my A-levels and the start of university. It was a lot of work, but it kept me busy, kept my mind from dwelling on the past. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to make the most of the opportunities one had. In the evenings, I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker on as the sun set. The world outside was vast and full of possibilities, and I knew that my journey was just beginning. There would be ups and downs, but I was ready to face them, ready to take control of my life and shape my own destiny. And so, with a mix of fear and excitement, I stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was more than the sum of my experiences, more than the pain and betrayal I had endured. I was strong, resilient, and capable of creating a life that was truly my own. The road ahead was long, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, towards a future that I would build with my own hands.